I'm Mr. Midnight Hollow, your terrifying host, and you're about to hear the true story of the werewolf that terrorized Denver in ways you never thought possible. Today, I've got a chilling account of intelligent predators, desperate hunts for survival, and a creature that refuses to die, featuring the real people who face something beyond comprehension and barely live to tell the tale. If you're already part of our community, your support means the world to us. Each like, comment, and share helps uncover more stories like this. Or subscribe to see what rises from the depths of darkness and unfolds before you. Now, let's begin. The rain fell on Denver that Tuesday night, beating against the windows of Marcus Webb's apartment with an insistence that kept him awake. He had been a police officer for 23 years and knew the sound of rain on the city streets well. That night, however, something in the air seemed different. Marcus was not a man of intuition. He believed in evidence, in facts, in things that could be seen and verified. But even the most rational men feel when something is wrong. His phone rang at 3:45 in the morning. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, but there was something behind it that Marcus recognized as contained urgency. "We have a body in the North Zone, 46th Street, near the abandoned parking lot. They might be looking at wild animals. I need you to go." Marcus was out of his house in 20 minutes. The car crossed Denver's wet streets, traffic lights reflecting off the dark asphalt. The rain had stopped, leaving only the smell of wet earth in the air. He turned on the radio, but the transmission seemed normal. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing that justified the tingling in his spine. The crime scene was surrounded by 3 patrol cars when Marcus arrived. The uniforms were grouped near a wire fence, speaking in low voices. The body was 20 meters ahead, near a cluster of bushes. Even from a distance, Marcus knew that this was not an ordinary death. He approached slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the light of the flashlights the officers held pointed at the body. What he saw made him stop. In 23 years, Marcus had seen a lot. Car accidents with unrecognizable victims, brutal suicides, passionate murders that left more questions than answers. But he had never seen anything like this. The body was scattered. There was no other way to describe it. Victims usually stayed where they fell or were dragged somewhere. This body had been literally dispersed. One arm lay 4 meters away, still wearing the jacket. The right leg had been separated from the body at the knee, leaving a white, shining bone exposed. The entrails formed a pattern on the ground, as if someone had drawn with them. And the face, or what remained of it, looked upward, with an expression of surprise so complete, it seemed like a sculpture of horror. "Who found it?" Marcus asked, still observing the scene. One of the officers, a young man named Torres, who had only 5 years on the force, pointed to an older man sitting on the side of a patrol car. "That one. His name is Robert Chen. Works for an industrial cleaning company. He was looking for scrap metal in the parking lot back when he found this." Marcus approached Chen. The man trembled despite the safety vest someone had placed over his shoulders. His eyes were fixed on some distant point, as if still seeing something the rest of those present could not. "Mr. Chen, did you see what happened here?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice calm and controlled. Chen's eyes moved slowly toward Marcus, but it took a moment for them to focus. When they did, the detective saw pure terror in them. Not shock or fear, but terror. The kind that comes from witnessing something that breaks every rule of what a man believes is possible. "I didn't see it happen," Chen whispered. "I just found him like this. I was looking for copper wire in the back near the old fence. I almost stepped on him. I almost stepped on his hand." Chen gestured weakly toward the body. His hand was in a pool of blood, just his hand. "Did you see anything? Anyone running away? A vehicle?" "No, nothing. Just the body and the blood and the—" Chen's voice trailed off, his jaw clenched. "The tracks." Marcus's attention sharpened immediately. What tracks? Chen pointed with a trembling finger toward the area beyond the body, where the ground disappeared into darkness. There, in the mud. I saw them before the police arrived. They were huge. I don't know what animal could make tracks like that. They looked like, I don't know, paw prints, but wrong. The size was wrong. Torres interjected, "We've got the crime scene unit photographing everything. They found tracks in the mud about 30 meters from the body. Whatever did this was big." Marcus walked toward the designated area. The mud was still wet, perfect for preserving impressions. He crouched down and examined the first clear print. Torres was right. The size was wrong. The depth was wrong. Whatever had made this track weighed a considerable amount. The shape was roughly canine, but the proportions were impossible. A print that large would belong to something bigger than any dog, bigger than most bears. But there was something else. Mixed with the canine prints were partial handprints, human handprints, not complete, but distinct enough to show fingers and a palm. Whatever had made these tracks was capable of moving on 4 limbs and 2 limbs interchangeably. "Get Dr. Sarah Cross from the university," Marcus said to Torres. "She's a biologist who does consulting work with the department. Tell her we might have an animal attack and we need her expertise." "You think it's an animal?" Torres asked. Marcus stood, looking at the scattered remains of what had been a human being just hours before. The brutality of the death was matched only by its seeming impossibility. An animal could have done this, certainly. But Marcus had never heard of an animal that could tear a human body into pieces with this degree of destruction. There was an intelligence to it, a deliberateness. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "we need to know exactly what we're dealing with before we start guessing. Keep this area secure. No one goes near those tracks. And get a photographer out here to document everything before the sun comes up and washes these away." The sun rose over Denver 2 hours later, revealing the full scope of the destruction in harsh daylight. The body, what remained of it, was carefully photographed and documented by the crime scene unit. The victim was identified through fingerprints as Stephen Price, 34 years old, a man with no significant criminal record, no known enemies, and no reason to be in an industrial area at 3 in the morning. By noon, Marcus was sitting in the medical examiner's office, waiting for preliminary results. Dr. Alan Foster, the ME who had worked with the department for 15 years, looked troubled. "I've never seen anything quite like this," Foster said, pulling up images on his computer. "The trauma patterns are consistent with a large predator attack. The bite marks on the remaining portions of the neck and upper body are unusually large. The pressure required to inflict these wounds would be extraordinary." "Like what animal?" Marcus asked. Foster hesitated. "That's the problem. There's nothing. A large bear could do this damage, but we don't have bears walking around Denver. A big cat, possibly, but the bite radius is too large. The claw marks don't match any known species in Colorado. And then there are these." Foster pulled up another image, this one showing marks on the victim's torso. "These are handprints. Human handprints based on the finger and palm structure. But the size is wrong. These belong to something roughly 3 times larger than a normal human hand." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "So you're saying the victim was attacked by something that has both human and animal characteristics?" "I'm saying," Foster replied carefully, "that whatever killed this man was something I can't classify with standard zoological or forensic knowledge." That night, Marcus drove through Denver's North Zone, trying to understand the geography of the attack. The abandoned parking lot sat in an industrial area that had seen better days. Factories had closed. Businesses had moved. The area was visited primarily by scrappers looking for salvage and the occasional homeless person seeking shelter. It was isolated enough that screams might not be heard, dark enough that something could hide. He pulled into a gas station around midnight and bought coffee. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, recognized him from previous visits. "You hear about that thing that killed someone near the old industrial area?" she asked, making conversation. "I heard it was bad, real bad." "Where did you hear that?" Marcus asked. "My nephew works in a warehouse over there. He said the police were out looking for some kind of animal. Said they found tracks that didn't match anything normal." She handed him his coffee. "They're stories, you know. Old stories the old-timers tell about Denver, before it was a big city. They talk about things in the mountains, things that don't belong to any known species. I always figured it was just drunk talk, but maybe there's something to it." Marcus left the gas station with more questions than answers. He drove past the crime scene again, noting how the area seemed to shift from residential to industrial, from order to chaos, from civilization to wilderness. It was exactly the kind of place where something dangerous could hide. He didn't know it yet, but the body of Stephen Price was only the first. The creature that had killed him was already moving through Denver's shadows, already selecting its next victim, already preparing for a hunt that would transform the city into a hunting ground. At that very moment, in a shelter across town, a man named David Hartley was closing his eyes for sleep, unaware that he would not wake up. In another part of the city, a young couple named Jennifer and Michael Torres were returning late from a movie, completely unaware that their route home would take them past the exact location where the creature was waiting. And in a quiet house in the suburbs, a man named Victor Reeves was checking his front door lock one final time before bed, a man who would, in 3 days, lose everything. The hunt had begun, and Denver had no idea what was coming. The second body was found 3 days later. A jogger named Patricia Morrison discovered it in the early morning hours along the Cherry Creek Trail, a popular path that wound through the city's parks. She had been running her usual route when she noticed the smell first. Something rotten and wrong carried on the wind. Patricia almost didn't investigate. She almost kept running. But something made her deviate from the path, made her push through the undergrowth toward the source of that smell. What she found made her scream so loudly that people heard her from the main street 2 blocks away. Marcus arrived at the scene within the hour. The body belonged to David Hartley, the man Marcus had thought about the previous night without knowing why. Hartley had been a maintenance worker at a downtown office building, 38 years old, divorced, lived alone in an apartment in the North Zone. There was no obvious connection between Hartley and Stephen Price, the first victim. They lived in different neighborhoods, worked in different industries, belonged to different social circles, but the manner of death was identical. The body had been torn apart with savage brutality. The wounds showed the same impossible bite radius, the same claw marks that didn't match any known animal. The same indications of both human hands and animal claws working in concert. Dr. Foster, when he examined the remains, used almost identical language to describe the injuries. "Same predator," Foster said, meeting Marcus in his office later that afternoon. "I'd stake my career on it. The bite pattern is distinctive. The way the claws tore through the muscle tissue is consistent. This is the same creature that killed Stephen Price. So we have a serial killer who's disguising murders to look like animal attacks," Marcus said, thinking out loud. "No," Foster replied firmly. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this is an actual animal attack. Multiple attacks by the same animal. There's no human serial killer doing this. The pattern is too consistent, the brutality too extreme, the physical evidence too clear." Marcos felt frustration building in his chest. "Then what animal, Dr. Foster? What animal in Colorado can do this?" Foster had no answer. By the next morning, the story had leaked to the press. The headlines screamed about a dangerous predator loose in Denver. The mayor's office issued a statement urging citizens to remain vigilant and avoid outdoor activities after dark. The police department received hundreds of calls from people reporting animal sightings, most of them false alarms, exaggerations or misidentifications of ordinary wildlife. But some of the calls were different. A woman named Sandra Lowry called to report that she had seen something moving through her backyard at night. She described it as large, moving on 4 legs, but with something wrong about the way it moved. Like it could stand up on 2 legs if it wanted to, she told the dispatcher. Like it was choosing not to. A man named Derek Holmes called to report finding deep claw marks on the wooden fence surrounding his property. The marks were too large, too deep, and too deliberate to be the work of any local animal. "It's like something tested the fence," he said. "Like it was checking if it could break through." A teenager named Michael Chen called to report that he had heard something outside his window at night, a sound like breathing, heavy and wet, accompanied by what he described as a low growl that seemed to come from a throat built wrong, a throat designed for something other than a simple growl. By day 4, there were 6 reported sightings of something unusual in various parts of Denver. By day 5, the number had risen to 12. By day 6, Denver's North Police Precinct was overwhelmed with reports. Marcus began to piece together a pattern. The sightings seemed to cluster around certain neighborhoods, certain areas. Most of them occurred after dark. Many of them included descriptions of something moving with unusual grace and power, something that seemed to observe before it acted. Several witnesses mentioned eyes, large bright eyes that seemed to catch light and throw it back like mirrors. On the 7th day, the 3rd body was discovered. This time, Marcus found it himself. He had been driving through the industrial zone late at night, unable to sleep, unable to stop thinking about the pattern. His instincts, the ones he claimed not to have, were screaming that something was wrong. He drove past the abandoned parking lot where Stephen Price had been found, past the area where David Hartley's remains had been discovered. He was heading north toward the older industrial buildings that still operated as warehouses and manufacturing plants, when he saw something on the side of the road. At first, it looked like trash, a dark bundle near a drainage ditch, but as Marcus got closer, he recognized the shape of a human torso. The body belonged to a man named Gregory Walsh, a night security guard who worked at one of the warehouses. He had been reported missing when he failed to show up for his shift. His family had filed a missing person report. The police had begun a standard search. And now they had found him, or what remained of him, torn to pieces in a drainage ditch like discarded garbage. This time, however, there were witnesses. 2 workers from the warehouse across the street had been on a smoke break when they heard the screams. They had seen something large moving away from the scene, disappearing into the darkness before they could make out any details. But both men agreed on one thing. Whatever it was moving on 2 legs. At the moment it fled, it had stood upright, like a man, before it bounded away into the industrial maze of Denver's North Zone. "It looked at us," one of the workers, a man named Harold Simons, told Marcos. "Before it ran, it stopped and looked directly at us. I swear to God I saw intelligence in those eyes. That wasn't just an animal. That was something that knew we were there. That chose to run rather than attack us." Marcus interviewed the second worker, a younger man named Felipe Rodriguez. Felipe's hands shook as he spoke, and his voice came in whispers. "I've hunted deer since I was a kid," Felipe said. "I know animals. I know the difference between instinct and choice. That thing made a choice. It could have attacked us. We were close enough, and we were distracted. But it didn't. It decided running was better than fighting. That's not animal behavior. That's thinking." That night, Marcus sat in his apartment and spread out everything he had on the 3 murders. 3 victims, 3 crime scenes, 1 predator. The pattern was becoming clearer but no more understandable. The creature was intelligent. It was choosing its victims carefully. It was avoiding confrontation when it could. But when it did attack, it was absolutely brutal. Absolutely thorough, leaving almost nothing behind but scattered remains and cryptic tracks that refused to match any known species. Marcus's phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was Torres. "There's been another incident," Torres said, his voice tight. "Not a body, not yet anyway. A homeowner in the suburbs shot at something in his yard. Says it was big, says it moved like nothing he'd ever seen. He fired his rifle at it, and whatever it was, it didn't even seem to slow down. Just kept coming until his wife pulled him inside and locked the doors." "Is he injured?" Marcus asked. "No. Says the thing attacked the house, not him. Tore at the back door. Left claw marks everywhere. When the homeowner fired through the door, there was blood. So maybe it's wounded. Maybe it's getting desperate. Or maybe, Marcus thought, it was getting angry." He drove to the suburb within 30 minutes. The house belonged to a man named Victor Reeves, the same man Marcus had thought about earlier, the same man who had checked his front door lock one final time before bed. Victor was standing in his backyard with police officers pointing out the damage. The back door was shredded. The wooden frame was split and torn, with claw marks so deep that they had gone completely through the structure. The deck was covered in blood, a large pool of it indicating that the creature had indeed been wounded by the rifle shot. But the blood trail led away from the house, disappearing into the darkness of the surrounding woods. Whatever had attacked Victor Reeves was still alive. Still wounded, perhaps, but alive. "Did you see it clearly?" Marcus asked Victor. Victor was a man in his 50s, built solid from years of physical work. But his hands trembled as he spoke, and his eyes had the same distant look that Robert Chen's had displayed. "I saw enough," Victor said. "I saw that it wasn't a bear or a mountain lion or any of the things they said on the news. It was bigger than any of that. And it was—" Victor paused, searching for words. It was wrong. That's the only word for it. Wrong. Like something that shouldn't exist, trying to exist anyway. I shot it with everything I had, and it barely seemed to notice. Just kept coming. Marcus examined the claw marks more closely. They were identical to the marks found at the other crime scenes. The same depth, the same angle, the same indication of enormous strength and terrible purpose. But there was something new here. Among the claw marks were something else. Words, or the attempt at words, scratched into the wood of the door frame. The letters were crude, made with something sharp, perhaps the creature's own claws. But they were unmistakably intentional. "I see you," they read. Marcus felt his blood run cold. An animal didn't write messages. An animal didn't leave intentional communications. An animal didn't threaten in human language, no matter how crudely rendered. This was something else. Something far worse than a simple predator. "Get this photographed and documented," Marcus told Torres, "and get the entire city on alert. Whatever this thing is, it's not just hunting, it's communicating. It's aware of us in a way that nothing wild should be aware. It's not trying to hide anymore. It's announcing itself." The message on Victor Reeves's door changed everything. Within hours, the police department received approval to bring in outside help. Dr. Sarah Cross, the biologist from the University of Colorado, arrived at police headquarters late that afternoon. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She had worked with law enforcement on wildlife matters before, but nothing had prepared her for what Marcus showed her. The photographs were laid out on a conference table, crime scene images, wound patterns, tracks, and the crude message scratched into Victor's doorframe. Sarah studied them in silence for nearly 10 minutes, her expression growing darker with each image. "This isn't possible?" she finally said. "That's what everyone keeps saying," Marcus replied. "But it's happening." 3 bodies, multiple sightings, a wounded creature that's still active. So either we figure out what it is, or it keeps killing until we do. Sarah pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. The bite radius is wrong. The claw marks are wrong. The track patterns are inconsistent with any known predator. And this. She pointed to the photograph of the message. Animals don't write messages. Animals don't communicate with humans in language. So what do we do? Marcus asked. We need to go to the kill sites. We need to collect tissue samples, hair samples, anything biological that we can analyze. Because whatever this is, it has to have a genetic code. It has to exist within the laws of biology, even if it doesn't fit our current understanding of what's possible. That night, Sarah accompanied Marcus to the industrial zone where the first body had been found. The area was different now, marked with police tape, watched by security, alive with the awareness of danger. They collected samples from the ground where Stephen Price's body had been scattered, careful to avoid contamination. Sarah examined the tracks in the mud, taking measurements and photographs. The proportions are deliberate, Sarah said as she worked. Whatever made these tracks didn't just stumble into this form. It's built for something. The way the weight is distributed, the angle of the joints, the depth of the impression, it suggests an animal that's both a powerful quadruped and capable of bipedal movement, like something that exists between forms. Between forms, Marcus repeated. Like something that can transform, or something that's designed to operate in multiple configurations. Sarah looked up at him. I'm not saying that to be poetic. I'm saying it as a biologist. These tracks suggest an organism with flexibility in its skeletal structure that shouldn't exist. They moved to the second kill site along Cherry Creek Trail. The ground had been disturbed by police and paramedics, but Sarah still found what she was looking for. Hair caught on a low branch, biological material that the creature had left behind in its feeding. This hair is unusual, Sarah said, examining it under a magnifying glass. It's thick, dense, built for protection and insulation. But the follicles are all wrong. They're not quite animal, not quite human. It's like something in between. Can you get DNA from it? Marcus asked. Maybe, if we're lucky. But even if we do, I don't know what database we'd compare it to. This thing isn't in any genetic registry I know of. The third location was more difficult. The drainage ditch where Gregory Walsh's body had been found was a narrow space, difficult to access, difficult to search. But Sarah was thorough. She collected everything, soil samples, vegetation, anything that might have come into contact with the creature. As they were finishing, Marcus's phone rang. It was Torres. We've got another one, Torres said, and Marcus could hear the exhaustion in his voice. A woman this time. She was out walking her dog near Washington Park. The dog is dead. She's in critical condition at Denver Medical Center. Marcus and Sarah drove to the hospital immediately. The victim was a woman named Patricia Chen, age 31, a software engineer who had decided to take her golden retriever for an evening walk despite the police warnings. The dog had seen the creature first, had tried to protect her, had died in the attempt. Patricia had survived only because a neighborhood watch patrol had been nearby and scared the creature away. Patricia was conscious but traumatized. Her arm was bandaged heavily, and deep lacerations ran from her shoulder to her wrist, where the creature's claws had torn through flesh and muscle. She was pale from blood loss, but her eyes were alert, fixed, terrified. I need to speak with her, Sarah said to the nurse. I need to know everything she saw. Patricia's voice was weak but steady as she described the encounter. The dog started growling. I didn't see anything at first, just felt this presence, like something was watching from the darkness. Then it came out from behind the trees. I thought it was a bear at first. That's what my brain told me to think. It was that big. But it moved wrong for a bear. It moved like it was dancing, like every movement was controlled and intentional. Did it seem like it was trying to kill you? Sarah asked. No, Patricia said, and her eyes widened as she realized what she was saying. It could have killed me. The dog was in the way, and it killed the dog easily. But when I started to run, it let me. It attacked me, yes, but it didn't kill me. It was like it was testing me. Like it wanted to see if I would run. Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look. The creature was hunting, yes, but it was also hunting with intelligence, with purpose. It was testing its prey, studying humans, learning about them. Over the next 3 days, Denver descended into a state of controlled panic. The news media covered the attacks relentlessly. Social media exploded with theories and speculation. Some people claimed it was an escaped genetic experiment. Others insisted it was a creature from folklore, a legend made real. Still others simply accepted the official narrative that it was an unusually aggressive wild animal and took precautions accordingly. The police department tripled patrols in the areas where attacks had occurred. Residents bought guns, installed security systems, and refused to venture outside after dark. The city was locked down by fear, though no one was willing to admit how deep that fear ran. Sarah continued her analysis of the samples she had collected. She sent hair and tissue to laboratories, contacted colleagues at universities across the country, searched through scientific literature for anything that might offer a clue. What she found was increasingly disturbing. "There's no match in any database," she told Marcus 4 days after Patricia Chen's attack. "I've compared the DNA to every known mammal species on the continent. There's nothing. This organism doesn't exist in our biological records. It's like finding something from another world. Or something that shouldn't exist in this one," Marcus said quietly. Sarah nodded slowly. The genetic code shows markers that are partially human, maybe 30% human, judging by the DNA structure. The rest is canine, but canine that's been modified somehow. It's like something took the genetic code of a wolf or large dog and spliced it with human DNA, then let it evolve into something new. Something that's survived by staying hidden, by hunting in ways that don't attract attention. "Until now," Marcus said. "Until now," Sarah agreed. That night, Marcus did something he had avoided doing for the past week. He pulled out the old newspapers from the Denver Public Library's archives. He searched for historical records, old stories, anything that might give him context for what was happening. What he found, buried in a newspaper from 1952, was a single article about livestock disappearances in the mountains west of Denver. Several ranches had reported animals being killed in a manner that couldn't be explained by natural predation. The kills were too brutal, too systematic, too intelligent. The article mentioned that several ranchers had organized a hunting party to track down whatever was killing their animals. The hunt had lasted 3 days. The article ended abruptly with a single sentence. "The hunting party returned unsuccessful. 2 members were unaccounted for and presumed dead." That was all. No follow-up article, no resolution, no explanation of what had happened to the missing hunters. Marcus dug deeper, finding other articles from other years. 1963. A series of disappearances in the mountains east of Denver. 1978. Brutal kills at a mountain cabin that had been attributed to a bear attack, though the evidence suggested something far more dangerous. 1991. Another hunting incident gone wrong, another story that ended in mystery. The pattern went back decades, maybe further. Whatever was hunting Denver now had been hunting in the region for a very long time. Marcus brought his findings to Sarah and to the police department. The implications were clear but almost unbelievable. Denver wasn't dealing with a new threat. It was dealing with something old, something that had learned to coexist with human civilization by staying hidden, by hunting carefully, by avoiding direct confrontation except when hunger or circumstance drove it to attack. Until now. Until something had changed. "Why is it attacking so openly now?" Marcus asked Sarah as they reviewed the historical records together. If it survived for decades, maybe longer, by staying hidden, what made it decide to start killing people in the city? Sarah had no answer, but her expression suggested she was afraid of what the answer might be. That night, as Marcus drove through Denver's dark streets, he received a call from Victor Reeves. Victor's voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it ran a current of barely contained panic. "It's back," Victor said. "It's in my yard again, right now. I can hear it outside. Stay inside. Lock all doors and windows. Don't engage. Police are on the way." "It's not trying to get in," Victor said. "It's just sitting there, watching the house. I can see its eyes reflecting the light from the porch lamp. It's watching, waiting, like it's decided my house is where it wants to be." Marcus was already in his car, driving toward Victor's neighborhood. Behind him, Sarah was following in her own vehicle. They arrived within minutes to find police cars surrounding the property, their lights casting alternating red and blue shadows across the suburban landscape. Victor was standing on his porch, rifle in hand, staring into the darkness of his backyard. The creature was there, barely visible in the shadows between the trees. All Marcus could see clearly were the eyes, large, bright, catching the light and throwing it back in an eerie reflection. The eyes of something intelligent, something aware, something that had decided. This house and this man were significant for reasons only it understood. "Don't move," Marcus said to Victor. "Don't provoke it." "It's been there for 20 minutes, Victor replied. "It's not attacking. It's just watching, like it's studying me." Sarah arrived and immediately began setting up photographic equipment, trying to capture images of the creature in the darkness. But every photograph came out blurred, incomplete, refusing to provide the clarity they needed. Then, slowly, the creature rose. It stood on its hind legs, adopting a bipedal posture that made its massive form even more terrifying. It stood there for a long moment, looking directly at Victor, directly at Marcus, directly at Sarah. Then it turned and bounded away into the darkness, moving with a grace and speed that no natural animal could manage. But before it disappeared completely, it did something that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. It turned its head one final time and looked back at them. And in that moment, Marcus saw something in the creature's eyes that he would never forget. Recognition, acknowledgement, understanding. The creature knew them. It had been studying them not as prey, but as a threat that needed to be evaluated, understood, and eventually eliminated. "It's hunting us now," Sarah whispered, speaking the words that Marcus was thinking. "It's decided that we're the danger, and it's planning to do something about it." The next morning, Marcus received a call that changed everything. A man named James Garrett was waiting at the police station, demanding to speak with whoever was leading the investigation into the creature attacks. James was a former military officer, 56 years old, with the bearing and scars of someone who had seen combat. He also had something else, information. "My son was killed by that thing," James said without preamble when Marcus entered the interrogation room. 6 months ago, in the mountains west of here. I've been hunting it ever since." Marcus pulled up a chair. "Tell me everything." James's story was one of obsession and loss. His son, Daniel, had been an experienced outdoorsman who worked as a guide for hiking expeditions in the mountains. 6 months ago, Daniel had failed to return from a solo trip into the wilderness. A search and rescue operation had found his body 3 days later. The official report concluded that Daniel had been killed by a bear attack, though the injuries were unusually severe. But James knew better. James had seen the wounds up close. James had hired private investigators to look into the incident. And James had discovered something that the authorities had either missed or deliberately ignored. The tracks found at the scene didn't match any known bear. The bite radius was too large. The claw marks showed a pattern consistent with something that moved on 2 legs as easily as 4. "I've been tracking it for 6 months," James continued. "Following the pattern of kills, studying the behavior, learning its habits. It stays in the mountains most of the time, but it comes down to the city occasionally. When it does, people die. The authorities don't want to admit what's actually happening because it's impossible. But impossible things are still real if they're killing your family." "Why come to us now?" Marcus asked. "Because I found someone else," James said. "Another man who lost someone to this creature. A man named Victor Reeves. He's been tracking it too in his own way. He reached out to me through some hunters' forums online. We've decided to do what the authorities won't do. We're going to hunt it down and kill it." Marcus felt a warning bell ringing in his mind. "You're not going to do that. That's suicide." "Maybe," James said. "But it's better than waiting for it to kill someone else. It's better than living in fear. And it's better than pretending that this is some kind of normal animal problem that the police can handle with normal methods. You can't shoot this thing with standard ammunition and call it a day. You need coordination. You need strategy. You need people who are willing to do what it takes. I'll have you arrested if you attempt any vigilante action," Marcus said flatly. James stood to leave. "Then arrest me now, because I'm going to hunt that creature down and end this, with or without police cooperation. Victor Reeves is with me on this. We've got resources, we've got knowledge, and we've got motivation. The only question is whether you're going to help us or get in our way." James left the station before Marcus could respond. Marcus immediately contacted Victor Reeves and confirmed that James was telling the truth. Victor was indeed planning some kind of hunting expedition. Victor was preparing weapons, equipment, and strategy. And Victor was doing it tonight. Marcus tried to stop him. He went to Victor's house and found the man loading supplies into a truck. Rifles, ammunition, GPS equipment, survival gear. Victor was methodical about it. Efficient. The actions of someone who had made a decision and would not be swayed. "This is insane," Marcus said. "You're going out there with one other person to hunt something that has killed multiple people and survived in the wild for decades." "It killed Patricia Chen," Victor replied, referring to the woman whose dog had been killed. "It could have killed her, but it didn't. That means it's capable of choice, capable of mercy or at least restraint. That means it can be reasoned with or it can be defeated. It's not some mindless beast. It's something with intelligence, something that can be understood and fought." "And if you're wrong?" Marcus asked. Victor loaded the last piece of equipment and turned to face the detective. "Then I die doing something that matters. I die trying to protect this city from something that should never exist in the first place. That's better than living in fear and waiting for it to come for me anyway." Marcus called Sarah and told her what was happening. Sarah arrived at Victor's house minutes later, still in the clothes she had been wearing the previous night, clearly having not slept. "They're going to get themselves killed," Sarah said, watching Victor and James load the last of their supplies into the truck. "I know," Marcus replied, "but I can't stop them. They're not breaking any laws yet. They're just preparing for a hunting trip." "Then come with me," Sarah said. "We're going to follow them. We're going to document what happens. And if things go wrong, we're going to be there." Marcus agreed, though he knew it was a terrible idea. They followed Victor and James at a distance as the two men drove out of Denver, heading toward the mountains where Daniel Garrett had died 6 months before. They drove for 2 hours, leaving the city behind, entering the wilderness where cell phones lost signal and civilization felt very far away. James and Victor set up a base camp in a remote area, away from any trails or marked paths. They spent hours planning their approach, studying maps, discussing strategy. They had done research. They had interviewed hunters who had seen the creature. They had compiled information about its patterns, its hunting grounds, its behavior. "It hunts at night," James said, pointing to a marked location on a map. "It returns to specific areas. Based on the pattern of kills and sightings, it seems to have a territory that encompasses this valley and the ridge systems on either side. If we can intercept it while it's hunting, we might have a chance." "Might," Victor repeated. "Might is all we're going to get," James replied. That night, Marcus and Sarah watched from a distance as James and Victor set up their ambush. They chose a location where the terrain funneled any large animal movement into a narrow corridor. They positioned themselves in the rocks above, with clear fields of fire. They set up bait, a deer carcass laced with a scent that might attract a predator. Then they waited. The night was cold and clear, the stars brilliant in the absence of city light pollution. Hours passed. James and Victor remained motionless, watching the bait, watching the terrain, waiting. Marcus and Sarah stayed in their own position, watching the hunters, waiting to see if anything would happen. It was nearly 2 in the morning when the creature emerged from the darkness. It came down the valley like a shadow-given substance, moving with a fluid grace that made it seem like it was gliding rather than running. It was enormous, easily 9 feet tall when it stood on its hind legs, its body covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light. The creature's face was a mixture of lupine and human features, with a snout and teeth designed for tearing flesh, but with eyes that held intelligence and awareness that no animal should possess. The creature saw the bait immediately. It approached cautiously, testing the scent, checking for danger. This was a predator that had survived for decades through careful observation and assessment. It would not fall for an obvious trap, but it didn't retreat either. The creature began to circle the bait, moving slowly, studying the setup. It was then that it caught the scent of the hunters. Its entire body went rigid. The creature's head turned in the direction of where James and Victor were positioned, hidden in the rocks above. For a long moment, nothing happened. The creature and the hunters faced each other across the darkness. A moment of perfect tension where everything hung in balance. Then James fired. The shot was loud, impossibly loud in the quiet of the mountains, echoing off the valley walls. The creature screamed, a sound that was half roar, half human shriek, and bounded away from the bait directly toward James's position. James fired again and again, but the creature moved with a speed that made the shots miss or barely graze its fur. Victor fired from his position, trying to catch the creature in a crossfire. One shot struck true, hitting the creature's shoulder and drawing blood. The creature changed direction, moving toward Victor instead, covering the distance between them in seconds. What happened next would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. Victor tried to reload his rifle, but the creature was too fast. It was on him before he could chamber another round. Victor fired once more at point-blank range, hitting the creature directly in the chest, but the momentum of the creature's charge knocked the rifle from his hands and sent him flying backward, slamming hard into the rocky ground. The creature stood over Victor, its jaws open, its claws extended. For a moment, it seemed like Victor would be torn apart where he stood. But then the creature did something unexpected. It paused. It looked down at Victor with those intelligent eyes, and then it made a sound, a low, almost musical sound that might have been laughter or recognition. Then it turned and charged directly at James. James had abandoned his position and was running, trying to reach his truck. But the creature was faster. It cut off his escape, driving him back toward the rocks. James pulled a knife from his belt, a large hunting knife that looked absurdly small against the creature's massive form, and held it ready. "Stay back!" James screamed, his voice breaking with fear and fury. The creature came at him in a blur of movement. James slashed with a knife, drawing blood, but the creature's claws found him first. The first swipe opened his chest, sending him to his knees. The second swipe reached for his face, and James threw up his arm in defense. His arm was torn, the wound deep and terrible, exposing bone. But then Victor was there, having recovered from his fall. Victor threw a large rock at the creature, striking it in the head. The creature turned its attention to Victor, and in that moment, James ran. Victor ran as well, both men moving toward the truck with the creature in pursuit. They reached the vehicle and threw themselves inside, slamming the doors just as the creature arrived. The creature crashed against the truck, its claws raking the metal, its strength enough to rock the entire vehicle. James managed to get the engine started despite his injuries. The truck lurched forward, and the creature clung to it for a moment before dropping away. But as they drove away, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. The creature stood in the clearing they had just left, watching them go, and its mouth was open in what looked unmistakably like a smile. They had wounded it, they had fought it, and it had let them escape, which meant that somewhere, somehow, the creature had made a decision. The same decision that Sarah had suspected. This wasn't about hunting for food anymore. This was about strategy. This was about teaching the humans a lesson before delivering a final blow. Marcus and Sarah drove after James and Victor, following them back down the mountain. They reached the truck just as James was collapsing from blood loss. His wound was severe, requiring immediate medical attention. Victor's injuries were better, but still serious. Both men had been outmatched by something that was stronger, faster, and far more intelligent than any normal animal. As they raced toward Denver and the hospital, Marcus finally understood the full scope of the problem. They weren't dealing with a predator that could be killed with conventional tactics. They were dealing with something that had evolved beyond simple animal aggression. Something that was capable of understanding human behavior, human tactics, human attempts at defense, something that was setting a trap of its own, and everyone who tried to hunt it was walking directly into it. James Garrett survived his injuries, but barely. The doctors at Denver Medical Center said he had lost enough blood that another 10 minutes without treatment would have been fatal. Victor Reeves recovered more completely, though the psychological trauma of the encounter left him haunted. Both men refused to discuss what had happened in the mountains in any detail, but their faces told the story of men who had confronted something beyond their capacity to fight. The creature did not return to the city immediately after the mountain encounter. For 5 days there were no new attacks, no sightings, nothing but an oppressive silence that made the entire city hold its breath. The police patrols continued. Citizens remained vigilant, but everyone could feel it, the sense that something was building, that the creature was planning, preparing. Sarah spent those 5 days analyzing everything they had learned. She worked with colleagues at universities across the country, consulted with geneticists and wildlife experts, studied historical records and folklore. What she discovered was a pattern that went back much further than anyone had realized. "There are stories," Sarah told Marcus on the 4th day of the silence. "Not just recent incidents. Stories going back centuries. Native American tribes in this region spoke of a creature that was neither man nor beast. A thing that hunted in the mountains and sometimes came down to the valleys. The stories are remarkably consistent across different tribal records. They describe something that was intelligent, that could think and plan, that seemed to have a purpose beyond simple survival." "Are you suggesting this creature has existed for centuries?" Marcus asked. "I'm suggesting that something like this creature has existed for a very long time. Whether it's the same individual creature or a succession of them, I don't know. But the consistency of the descriptions is remarkable, and there are gaps in the historical record. Times when the creature seems to disappear for years, sometimes decades, before reappearing? Hibernation, Marcus suggested. Or hiding, learning, planning. This creature is intelligent, Marcus. More intelligent than we've been willing to admit. It's not hunting us randomly. It has purpose. It has strategy. And based on what happened with James and Victor, it's now aware that humans pose a threat to it. On the 5th night of silence, Marcus received a call from an unexpected source. It was Robert Chen, the man who had discovered the first body weeks ago. Robert sounded terrified, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's outside my house," Robert said. "Right now. It's been circling for an hour. The police said they'd send someone, but I don't know if they'll get here in time. It keeps looking at the windows. It knows I'm in here." Marcus told Robert to lock all doors and windows, to stay away from windows, to keep the lights on. Then Marcus drove toward Robert's address with Sarah following behind him. They were 15 minutes away when Robert called again. "It's breaking in," Robert whispered. And in the background, Marcus could hear the sound of breaking glass and splintering wood. "It's—" The line went dead. Marcus drove faster. When they reached Robert's house, they found it silent and dark. The front door was hanging open. The windows were broken. And there was blood on the sidewalk, leading into the house and then out again, disappearing into the darkness of the neighboring yards. "It took him," Sarah said, staring at the trail of blood. "It broke in, killed or captured him, and took him somewhere." "Why?" Marcus demanded. "Why take him when it could just kill him here?" "Because it's not done with us," a voice said from behind them. Marcus and Sarah spun around to see James Garrett emerging from the darkness. James was still recovering from his mountain wounds, but his eyes burned with a fever that had nothing to do with physical injury. He had a rifle in his hands and a pistol on his hip. "You know where it's taking him," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "I know where it lives," James confirmed. "Or at least, I know where it goes. After what happened in the mountains, I did more research. I talked to old hunters, old guides who know the wilderness. There's a place deep in the mountains where it's been seen repeatedly over the years, an area where livestock disappears, where hikers vanish, where the local tribes said the creature had its lair." "You're going after it?" Sarah said, also a statement, not a question. "I'm going to finish what I started," James replied. "And I'm going to get Robert Chen back if he's still alive. You can come with me or you can arrest me. Choose." Marcus made the choice without hesitation. He called Torres and gave him instructions to arrange a tactical team, to prepare for a possible hostage rescue operation, to treat this as an emergency. Then he followed James into the darkness. They drove into the mountains as dawn was breaking. James knew the terrain, knew the roads that weren't marked on maps, knew the ways through the wilderness that could only be traveled by someone with intimate knowledge of the area. They drove for hours, climbing higher into the mountains, leaving civilization behind. Finally, they reached a location where no vehicle could go further. The roads became trails, the trails became overgrown paths, the paths became wilderness. They hiked for another 2 hours, moving through terrain that grew increasingly remote and increasingly hostile. And then they saw it, the lair. It was built into the side of a cliff face, hidden by an overhang of rock and dense vegetation. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than a cave. But as they got closer, Marcus could see evidence of habitation, bones scattered around the entrance, some of them human. Claw marks on the rock face, deep gouges that showed the creature's strength and rage, and everywhere the smell of blood and death. "It's in there," James whispered. "I can feel it. It knows we're coming." They heard Robert Chen before they saw him. He was screaming, a sound of pure agony that echoed out of the cave entrance. The screams came in waves, sometimes rising to a pitch of absolute terror, sometimes fading to barely audible whimpers. "It's alive," Marcus said. "Robert is alive." "For now," James replied, "but not for much longer if we don't move." They entered the cave carefully, weapons ready, moving slowly to let their eyes adjust to the darkness. The interior was vast, a massive cavern that seemed to extend deeper into the mountain than should have been possible. And everywhere, there was evidence of the creature's presence: bones, fur, dried blood on the walls. Robert Chen was suspended from the ceiling of the cave by some kind of crude binding made from branches and vines. His body was covered in cuts and lacerations, but he was still alive, still conscious, his eyes wide with terror and pain. And then the creature emerged from the shadows. It was larger than it had been before, or perhaps it simply seemed that way in the confined space of the cave. Its fur was matted with blood. Some of it Robert's, some of it its own from the wounds inflicted during the mountain encounter. Its eyes were focused, intelligent, aware. For a long moment, nothing happened. The creature and the three humans faced each other across the darkness of the cave, a standoff that seemed to stretch into eternity. Then James fired. The shot echoed through the cave like thunder, the sound amplified by the stone walls until it seemed like the entire mountain was shaking. The creature screamed and charged, moving with a speed that defied physics, covering the distance between them in seconds. Marcus fired, hitting the creature in the shoulder. Sarah fired from a position near the cave entrance, trying to catch it in crossfire. But the creature moved with an evasive grace that made most of the shots miss. The few that connected seemed to only enrage it further. James backed away, firing repeatedly, trying to keep the creature's attention focused on him rather than the others. The creature pursued him toward the back of the cave, its claws raking the stone, its jaws snapping at empty air as James dodged and rolled. Then James stepped on loose stone and fell. He tried to scramble backward, but the creature was on him, its jaws reaching for his throat. James got his arm up just in time, and the creature's teeth closed on his forearm instead of his neck. Blood sprayed across the cave floor as the creature shook him like a toy, then threw him against the wall. James crumpled, broken and bleeding. The creature turned its attention to Marcus. What happened in the next seconds would define everything that followed. Marcus stood his ground, rifle raised, looking directly into the creature's yellow eyes. And in that moment, he understood something that had been eluding him since the beginning. The creature was intelligent, yes, but it was also lonely. It was the last of something, or perhaps the first of something new. It was an aberration, a thing that should not exist, trapped in a body that was neither human nor animal, belonging nowhere, hunted by everyone, with nothing but the hunt to give its existence meaning. And that understanding changed everything. "Stop," Marcus said, not raising his voice, speaking calmly and directly. "I know what you are. I know what you've lost. I know why you're doing this. But this ends now, not with your death, but with understanding." The creature paused, confused by the words, by the tone, by the sudden shift in the dynamics of confrontation. It was the moment that Sarah needed. She had moved to Robert Chen and was cutting him down from his bindings. Robert fell to the ground, injured and traumatized but alive. Sarah half carried, half dragged him toward the cave entrance. The creature turned to follow, and Marcus fired. The shot was perfectly placed, hitting the creature directly in the spine. The massive beast staggered, its coordination suddenly compromised, and that was enough. Marcus fired again and again, driving the creature backward into the depths of the cave. James, broken but still conscious, managed to throw a device that Marcus recognized as a flare. The flare ignited inside the cave, filling the space with brilliant light and heat. In the chaos and confusion of the flare, Marcus ran toward the cave entrance. They emerged into sunlight with Robert between Sarah and Marcus, James limping behind them, and the creature's screams echoing from deep within the cave. They didn't look back. They couldn't afford to look back. They made it to their vehicle just as the tactical team arrived. Police officers, paramedics, and backup units swarmed the area. Robert was loaded into an ambulance. James was rushed to the hospital for emergency medical treatment. Marcus and Sarah stood in the sunlight, covered in blood and dust and the remnants of a battle that should never have happened. "Is it dead?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Marcus replied. "But it's been driven deep into the cave. If it survives, it will think twice before coming back to Denver." But even as he said it, Marcus knew it was a lie. The creature would come back. Because creatures like that didn't simply give up. They adapted, they learned, they evolved. And somewhere in the mountains, wounded but not defeated, the thing that hunted in the dark was already planning its next move. The hunt wasn't over. It was only beginning again. 3 months passed after the incident in the cave. Denver returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the city would never be quite the same. The attack stopped. The creature did not emerge from the mountains. Life resumed its ordinary patterns, and people began to forget, or at least to pretend to forget, what had happened. Robert Chen survived his ordeal, though he required extensive reconstructive surgery and psychological therapy. He no longer worked for the cleaning company. He left Denver entirely, relocating to Seattle, unable to look at the industrial zone or the mountains without experiencing panic attacks. James Garrett spent 2 months in the hospital recovering from his injuries. When he was released, he gave several interviews to the media about his experience, though he was deliberately vague about the details. He claimed the creature was dead, killed in the cave during their confrontation. He claimed that Denver was safe. He claimed that what had happened was now over. But Marcus knew better. And so did Sarah. The truth was that they had never confirmed the creature's death. The cave was sealed off, declared structurally unstable, and access was restricted by the National Forest Service. A geological survey team was sent to investigate the cave system, but their findings were vague and inconclusive. The cave was extensive, they reported, with multiple chambers extending deep into the mountain. The initial chamber showed signs of habitation and violence, but no body was recovered. Marcus and Sarah maintained regular contact, meeting for coffee or lunch, discussing the case that officially didn't exist anymore because the threat had been declared eliminated. But they both understood the truth. They had wounded the creature. They had driven it deeper into the wilderness. They had bought the city time, but they had not killed it. Things like that were never simply killed. They adapted. They evolved. They waited. 6 weeks after the cave incident, Marcus was driving through Denver late at night when he noticed something that made him pull over. On the side of a building in the industrial zone, someone had painted a message. It was crude, done in what looked like blood or paint made to look like blood, but the message was unmistakable. "I am still here." Marcus photographed it immediately and sent the image to Sarah. She called him back within minutes. "It's alive," Sarah said without preamble. "It's trying to communicate with us. It's leaving a message." "To tell us what?" Marcus asked. "To remind us that it exists, to keep us aware, to maintain the tension. It's psychological warfare, Marcus. It's hunting us in a different way now, not with teeth and claws, but with fear." Over the following weeks, more messages appeared. They were painted on buildings in the industrial zone, scratched into the sides of vehicles, written in chalk on sidewalks. Always the same basic message, communicated in different ways. "I remain. You cannot stop me. The hunt continues. When darkness falls, I am waiting." The police tried to investigate, assuming they were dealing with some kind of copycat killer or prankster trying to capitalize on the creature incident. But Marcus knew better. The handwriting, the patterns, the specific locations where the messages appeared, they all matched the crude writing that had appeared on Victor Reeves's doorframe months before. The creature was intelligent enough to understand that it could not defeat the humans through direct confrontation. But it was intelligent enough to understand that it could maintain dominance through psychological pressure. It was keeping Denver afraid. It was reminding everyone that it was still out there, still watching, still planning. 2 months after the cave incident, a hiker disappeared in the mountains northwest of Denver. 3 weeks later, another hiker went missing in a different area. A week after that, a camper was found dead at a remote campsite, the body showing the same distinctive bite marks and claw wounds that characterized the creature's kills. The creature had not been dormant. It had been hunting. Not in the city, not where police protection could be concentrated, but in the wilderness where humans were isolated and vulnerable. Sarah compiled all the new information and presented it to Marcus in a detailed report. "It's evolved its strategy," Sarah explained. "It's learned that direct attacks on populated areas bring organized resistance. So it's shifted to hunting in areas where it can avoid detection, where its presence can be dismissed as animal predation, where isolated incidents won't trigger mass panic. It's becoming more sophisticated, more careful, more selective in its hunting patterns." "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. "We accept that this is our new reality," Sarah replied. "A creature exists that shouldn't exist. It hunts in the mountains and occasionally descends to the city. It's intelligent enough to understand human behavior and human response patterns, and it's not going anywhere. We can contain it. We can minimize the damage it causes, but we cannot eliminate it, not permanently, not completely." Marcus struggled with that acceptance. He was a man of order, of solutions, of problems that could be resolved. The idea of living in indefinite conflict with something that could not be permanently defeated was almost unbearable. But the evidence was undeniable. The creature existed. It was intelligent. It was evolving. And it was here to stay. Victor Reeves disappeared in early September. He left his house in the early evening, saying he was going to the grocery store. He never arrived. His car was found parked on a remote road in the mountains, engine running, driver's door open, interior covered in blood. A search and rescue team scoured the area but found nothing. No body, no traces, nothing that could explain what had happened. Marcus knew, though, the creature had taken Victor deliberately chosen its target, deliberately made a statement. James Garrett found Marcus at the police station the day after Victor's disappearance. James was different now, harder, more haunted, driven by a purpose that went beyond reason or safety. "We need to finish this," James said. "The creature is escalating. It's going to keep taking people until we do something permanent." "There is no permanent with this thing," Marcus replied. "We both know that. Then we go back to the cave. We go back with equipment, with explosives, with everything we need to seal that cave system permanently. If we can entomb it there, we can at least limit its ability to move freely." "That's suicide," Marcus said. "And it's impossible. The cave system is massive. You can't seal it with explosives without potentially triggering a collapse that would destroy the entire mountain." "Then what do you suggest?" James demanded. "That we just accept this? That we live in constant fear? That we wait for the next message, the next attack, the next victim?" Marcus had no answer. Because James was right. There was no good solution. There was only the choice between different levels of bad outcomes. That night, Marcus went to the cave alone. He didn't tell Sarah. He didn't tell the police. He simply drove into the mountains with a flashlight and a pistol. knowing he was probably walking toward his death. The cave entrance was just as he remembered it. The bones still scattered around the opening, the blood still staining the rocks, the sense of hostile presence still hanging in the air. He entered the cave slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness, moving carefully through the space where they had fought the creature months before. His flashlight beam played across the stone walls, illuminating centuries of mineral deposits and ancient geological formations. And then he found something that stopped him cold. In the deepest part of the cave, beyond where they had pursued the creature, Marcus found a chamber unlike anything he had expected. It was massive, easily the size of a cathedral, and its walls were covered with carvings, not random markings, intentional carvings, organized, methodical, purposeful. The carvings depicted the creature in various forms and poses. Some showed it on 4 legs, some on 2. Some showed it hunting, some showed it at rest. And between the images were symbols, patterns that Marcus couldn't quite interpret but that clearly held meaning. The creature had been here for a very long time. This wasn't a lair, Marcus realized. This was a home, a sanctuary. A place where something had lived and thought and existed for longer than any human civilization had existed in this land. And as Marcus stood there in the darkness, illuminating carvings made by an intelligence that predated modern understanding, he heard it. A sound from deeper in the cave, from a chamber even more remote, a sound like breathing, deep and rhythmic, almost melodic. The creature was there, waiting, watching, aware. Marcus backed out of the cave slowly, careful not to run, careful not to trigger an attack. He emerged into moonlight and drove back toward Denver, his mind reeling with implications. The creature wasn't a monster. It was something else. Something that had existed in these mountains for centuries, perhaps longer. Something that had learned to coexist with human civilization by remaining hidden, by hunting carefully, by maintaining a balance that humans were only now beginning to understand. But that balance was breaking down. Because humans had discovered the creature. Humans had tried to kill it. And now the creature was adapting to a new reality, where it could no longer remain completely hidden. Marcus never reported what he had found in the cave. He never told anyone about the carvings or the sense of ancient intelligence that permeated that deep chamber. Instead, he sent a formal report to his superiors stating that the cave had been thoroughly investigated. No evidence of the creature was found, and the case should be considered closed. The case was officially closed on September 15th, 3 months and 2 weeks after Stephen Price's body had been discovered in an abandoned parking lot. Life in Denver returned to normal. Or at least, a new version of normal that incorporated the understanding that something dangerous lived in the mountains and could never be completely eliminated. But sometimes, on quiet nights, Marcus would drive through the industrial zone and look at the spaces where messages had once been painted in blood. And he would wonder if the creature was still there, still watching, still planning, still waiting for the day when the hunt would begin again in earnest. And in the cave deep in the mountains, the creature made new carvings on the ancient stone. Images of humans with weapons. Images of confrontation. Images of something that was learning, adapting, preparing for a conflict that would define the next chapter of its existence. The hunt had not ended. It had only transformed into something more complex, more subtle, more terrifying in its implications. Because the most dangerous predator is not the one that kills indiscriminately. It is the one that thinks, the one that plans, the one that understands its prey well enough to outmaneuver them at every turn. And somewhere in the darkness of the mountains surrounding Denver, that predator was still thinking, still planning, still waiting, always waiting. Marcus Webb's battle against the werewolf stands as terrifying proof that some creatures are far more intelligent and dangerous than we ever imagined. The hunt in Denver's mountains is far from over, and this predator continues to evolve, to learn, and to wait. Like this video if you felt the dread of facing something that cannot be killed. Comment below which encounter terrified you the most: the first discovery, the mountain ambush, or the messages written in blood. Share this story with someone who needs to understand that legends walking among us are not just folklore, but a horrifying reality we must never forget. And most importantly, if you're brave enough to journey deeper into darkness, subscribe to Mr. Midnight Horror and activate the notification bell. That way, you'll always know when a new nightmare emerges from the shadows. Stay vigilant. Stay aware. The darkness is always watching.